have Sasnagai say a little thing first.
Kabasi, za tonei tene, Yohan taro yo, and that I think no barrel, ya that the chill, the cello, the tennis, Kale this, that I already had a organized watching to.
Sorry, I'm not organized. We had little disasters trying to hang up some posters here, and it took up more time than I planned. And they're still going to fall down, so they'll really get your attention. I've been asked to be the voice from the lands of the poplar aspen tree home human beings, what is now called Northern Saskatchewan, on Treaty 10 territory. My family are of the original ancient WUS2015 people who once graced these fine lands and clean waters that sustained thousands of generations since antiquity. This is the message that Sasnagai, our family head, who still is intrinsically connected to Treaty 10 territory, the land of his ancestors, has asked me to share with you. The fur trade era was a time period in the steps of the generations who had to comply with the wishes and obvious intent of dispossession by a global community bent on changing the worldviews of our people. During the fur trade era, where equality existed as one depended on the other for the subsistence economy to thrive, we also carried in our blood the condition as we wrought by a very close and dear connection with the natural world. The territory in question is located all along the vast Churchill River Basin and the land reservoir lakes in what is now known as the Churchill River. Our foraging area, which you can see on pretty much covers that entire map, is clearly demarcated from far southern areas as the shores of Montreal Lake all the way into the Northwest Territories. The vast lands sustained our ancient people to the soul and spirit of values inherent in the creation of a worldview and cultural bonds, epitomizing the constant relationship we, each one of us, descendants of those ancient people, had and still have to the lands. Being a child on the lands has meant many a soul-stirring memory. The seasonal changes within a continuous cycle, much more than the search for furs, drummed the energies as each seasonal expression, and we became its due function in human-laced emotion and spiritual connection to the earth. As a child, we traversed the vastness in canoes in the summer, open lakes and rivers, and musher teams in the coldest of winters. Our people had supreme technical prowess in the skillful creation of tools necessary for survival, and managed its use in whatever condition required of them to carry their onus as caretakers and stewards. The family groupings maintained their own areas. Reciprocity flourished, and other sciences, like the mysterious Inkazi medicine, made its way into the interpretation of a sacred world represented by the earth. The deities of the earth lived in the energies of all life forms from air, water, earth, fire, animals, fish, fowl, insects, and the myriad of hidden worlds seen and explored by the ancient practitioners of the people, who carried the study and knowledge of the artists, builders, cartographers, weather readers, land interpreters, and mathematicians also thrived as all were components of the technical prowess inherent in a people wishing to design crafts as wistful as material of necessity. Canoes, toboggans, bows, arrows, medicines from the endless supply of the plant world, and anything a great people studied became part of the worldview we knew as children. All were designed, built, used, and when past its use, left as a part of the decay process, disappearing, never having left a footprint. With the advent of the global community, all things had to change. Certain attributes lost forever, and lands and waters desecrated. Contaminants and stress came into our lives, and with it, destruction. Destruction of worldviews and a loss of the cultural and evaluative criteria that made us what we once were, a sovereign people. Machinations of the some kind of humans dictated us into irrelevance, and with it, complete dislocation of the lands we once loved as dearly as one would love one's own kin. Industrialization techniques, a whole new life, and people bred on consumerism entered our domain. New technologies, to be sure, were always a part of the changes in the early years. As we interacted with the Hudson's Bay Company storekeepers and fur buyers, as well as the bush aircrafts, radios, and very little of what constituted convenience to be bought and paid for in settings where it might have been of use, to distract from the incessant noise and constant display of people imaging a propaganda. Slowly, the material world crept in and took over. The changes following the numbered treaty years were slow, but after another 6 decades came the mining companies. The resource seekers mapped out places on our traditional lands where minerals lay. Uranium, the black rock, was a peculiar rock to the people down the ages, and always with an advisory to not touch and to be left alone. On pain of unleashing what was interpreted as demons or terrible things from the underworld. It was kept in place by the thunder beings. They also knew that the black rock was a sacred fire, continuously burning, and to be acknowledged as a deity and not to be touched ever. But the resource seekers didn't listen. Saskatchewan is currently the only province in Canada where uranium is being mined. It is the world's second largest producer of uranium yellowcake, and it is all on Dene's traditional territory. There are currently 5 mines operating, with 2 more waiting for the market to rise to begin. There are 4 mines that are now supposedly decommissioned, but with uranium tailings that will continue to be radioactive for thousands of years, any decommission is nothing more than an experiment. The Saskatchewan Research Council and the public taxpayers end up being responsible. The Gunner Mine, where the tailings were left to flow and blow into the Athabasca Lake for decades, will never be totally cleaned up. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission waved away the concerns of the Dene people about the contamination from this as a mistake of the past. The voices of the people of northern Saskatchewan have fallen on deaf ears. Reports on studies on the contamination of caribou, moose, and fish have not been shared publicly with the people. There is a colonial, patronizing attitude that the industry and government know more. But in the last couple of decades, the cancer rates have soared. The uranium companies have a partnership with the provincial health system and contribute donations, so no baseline studies were never done. Statistics are kept differently in northern Saskatchewan than they are in the south. So it makes it look like our cancer rates are the same as people in the south, when cancer was very rare in our territory. There's a whole motel in Saskatoon that is always full of cancer patients from the far north. When we took the CNSC to task on the issue of rising cancer rates in our community alone, it's 1 in 7. Like I said, a few years ago, that was very rare. They were scrambling to justify and assure that this was just because our people die younger and because of smoking. Well, lung cancer is only one of the cancers we see. To avoid protests and roadblocks that were held against the mines in the late 70s and early 80s, they created the Environmental Quality Committee. That was set up to supposedly give people, the northern people, a voice. There is a recent study shows that this falsely promotes political economic agendas and corporate entrenchment. The CNSC hearings on the licensings of the mines are very imperialistic. It's like really condescending towards Dene people. There are really no avenues to voice concerns and expect to have them heard. Oops, go back there. Oh, too far. Back one more. Give me a second. Our entire territory is inundated by mineral claims. The government states that this will be low impact on each claim, but with 15 claims in one small area of that area, that's large impact. It has significant impact on our hunting, fishing, gathering areas, on which we still depend for food. The uranium companies have been preening the elected leaders of our First Nations and Métis communities into business agreements, while the government threatens fiduciary cutbacks to the communities. Again, they promise to share the benefits more freely, or fairly, I should say, but they never talk about the impacts, the risks. They say they will monitor, which means to watch, but the government eliminated environmental protection laws, and the independent monitor is now the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They have undermined the decision-making of the people over our lands and waters. This upcoming video shows how it impacted our First Nation, English River First Nation, when they signed an agreement, a collaboration agreement with Cameco and Areva.
We didn't come here to cause grief or division. We just think it's a good way to put on a piece of paper so that you can hold us accountable for what we're doing going forward in the business, and that there's clear indication on paper of what benefits we can share. And so I just say that to you today. We're grateful to be here. We're grateful for the great meal and the friendship and fellowship we had around the table. We didn't mean to cause any grief, and so I just say to you, thank you for
everyone understand it fully and know what the agreement is about, and that we get feedback from the community members, every one of us, because this affects our land. This affects the long term. It's not just about today. We need more accountability and transparency from our leadership. And that's the way it should be. You talk about working together. We're not working together. You're keeping information from us. You're only telling us the good side, not the bad side. Why can't we look at both sides? Isn't it only fair for your people?
With that, thank you, Cheryl, for your comment. Our mandate is clear: to provide training, employment, and keep our Mother Earth sustainable for generations to come.
She wanted it, that's what she got. She wanted division between the people of the community, and she got it. Look at you guys, look at us, money here. And then what, they're going to ditch us? Wash your hands. You haven't listened to the people that have looked into this to find out what the damage is going to be? You haven't said anything about the impacts. It was all about the done, you're going to hold these ones responsible for the next 100,000 years.
As you can see, this has divided our people. Many people in northern Saskatchewan have become wise to the risks of uranium mining and don't want it anymore. Since November of 2014, the Dene Travelers Alliance has been manning a camp against the uranium exploration happening in the Northwest. In January, they held a meeting to address what they need to do to prevent any further mining. They've been staying in this camp throughout the entire winter. Saskatchewan of being the Saudi Arabia of the North. They want it all, from cradle to grave. Mining to nuclear waste storage and reprocessing. Our own band, English River First Nation, our neighboring Métis community of Pine House, and Creighton on the northeast side were signed up. This decision was made without ever consulting the people in these communities. We learned about the nuclear waste issue from our elders conference in Pine House, where nuclear waste management organization was rolled out to be the answer to youth suicide. Most of the elders that were taking part were so disturbed they left the talking circle. We formed the Committee for Future Generations and looked for an expert to inform our communities what the risks of nuclear waste storage would be if it was stored in our region. Within a couple of weeks, we held a forum with 250 people from 12 northern communities. From that, a resolution was made to petition the Saskatchewan government to ban nuclear waste storage in Saskatchewan. We took it as our duty to protect our lands and waters and made every effort to educate the people of the province about what we were all facing. For the past 4 years, our committee of Dene, Cree, Métis, and settler volunteers and our allies have dedicated our efforts to preventing Saskatchewan from becoming the nuclear waste dump of Canada. In 2011, we held the Wanska 7,000 Generations Walk against nuclear waste storage. We walked 850 kilometers from Pine House to the legislature in Regina, where we informed the government that we were going to petition for this ban. To date, more than 20,000 people have signed. In the communities of Pine House and English River, the majority of the adults in the communities signed the petition. And yet, community leaders, as Numu knew they would, did not act in the best interest of the communities when we asked them to leave. What they did for big money overrode what we wanted in our communities. Fear kept many people from speaking out. Fear of losing jobs. Fear of not getting privileges or opportunities. Division resulted, and we have noted that every community that this is being proposed in Canada has got the same thing happening. We took every opportunity to raise awareness, hours upon hours of research, Facebook information dissemination, and created a website. We fundraised doing yard sales to put up survival camps, to allow people to experience the land we are protecting, to teach them about the risks of radiation, and to give them ideas for alternatives. We have traveled the province and shared our situation across the country. We held rallies, and our youth walked again, this time in the Journey for Earth, where they walked 3,000 miles from Winnipeg to Ottawa to carry this important message all along the way. We had a sign campaign. It had a profound effect. Elder Fred Peterson put up a sign at the junction. Every other day it was taken down. He put up another sign. This happened over and over again. Nadine Smart of Creighton blanketed her community with signs. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization Community Liaison Committee attempted to have them banned by stating that the trefoil, the radiation symbol, was illegal. But that was untrue. Persistence, I am pleased to report, paid off. In November of 2013, NUMO announced both Pine House and English River First Nation had been eliminated from the process, partially due to the misinformation that we've been spreading. However, every time we've showed up with that same information, they have been unable to refute it. They weren't pleased to see us the following March in Creighton, but we attended every chance that we could and exposed the gaps that they had in their information. On March 3rd, last month, we were overjoyed to receive the news that Creighton had also been eliminated. Our lands and waters and our future generations are free of the specter of the demon from under the ground. I pray that the communities will get a chance to heal from the divisions this has caused, and I also pray that all the communities in Ontario also become free. In closing, I encourage all of you never to give up. Our future depends on it. Thank you.
We're going to hold questions till after the second presentation. Thank you very much. LORRAINE REKMANS, okay, was born in Elliot Lake, Ontario, Canada, where her father worked as a uranium miner. She's of the Algonquin French descent and is a member of the Serpent River First Nation. LORRAINE is an advocate for environmental and social justice issues through her work in both media and non-governmental organizations. She has a background in journalism and covered the first ever environmental assessment on decommissioning of uranium mines at Elliot Lake. She's the former executive director of the National Aboriginal Forestry Association. LORRAINE participated in the World Uranium hearing at Salzburg, Austria in 1992. She's the co-editor of This Is My Homeland, a book which captures the experiences of members of the Serpent River First Nation and impact on their lives from uranium mining at Elliot Lake. LORRAINE assisted in writing a number of international declarations, including the Indigenous Peoples Declaration on Forestry, which was submitted at the World Forestry Congress in 2003. Please welcome LORRAINE REKMANS.
Thank you. I do need some help to get my slideshow up, though. The computer seems to be locked up.
In the meantime, I'd like the audience to think about recommendations, not just to gather your opinions, your thoughts, sort of a concise couple of statements for each of our speakers. These will be presented at the end of the afternoon. So think about it, and we'll try to put it together at the end of the talk.
Miigwech, Peshe, Indigenous. So I just said my name is Robin in Anishinaabe language, and it's important that I open that way. I'd like to acknowledge the territory of the Huron-Wendat Nation. And I would also like to say that in invoking my spirit name, I stand before you as a witness to you in the eyes of the Creator. And it is a promise to tell you the truth and a promise to be as clear as I can be in sharing with you my experience. I grew up at Elliot Lake. I was born and raised there. And my father worked in the uranium mines. Incidentally, my great uncle worked at Port Radium. 1982, I was at the World Uranium hearing in Salzburg, where I had to admit to the witnesses there that my father was going to die as a result of mining uranium. That I just knew a sickness would claim him, I just didn't know when. And since that time he did pass, and what struck me was that I knew he was going to die, and I knew I was waiting for it, and I was waiting for him to pass. And I was terrified. I mean, it affected my whole life, that I didn't want to move away from home. I didn't want to go off and seek my fame and fortune because I knew I was going to lose him. And when he was sick, he went to hospital, and I would visit him in hospital and take care of him, wheel him around. And I said, Dad, I said, it's so terrible that you're in here, and since you've been in here and you've been sick, that none of your friends have come to visit you. No one stopped by. I've been there for weeks, and no one came. And my dad was French Canadian. He said, well, all my friends are dead. They all died from the mines. He said, there's nobody left to come and visit him, right? And that was the legacy of the uranium mines at Elliot Lake. But I thought about him living with that reality, living there in the hospital, knowing that he was one of the many that had been sacrificed to nuclear energy. I think that, sometimes the impact of, what we can talk about tailings, and I do have a slideshow, and it does show some pictures of the tailings at Elliot Lake, and it talks about the history of the mining. But the stories of the people, I think, are what are most telling. That when I listened to the presentations this morning in the workshops from the people from India, I said to myself, as Indigenous people, we are colonized, we are oppressed, we are impoverished, and then after that we get nuked. Seems to be the order of business. And, and I saw the discord in the community, and I come from a matrilineal society. I know enough about my history to appreciate my heritage as a woman, and to understand my place in the world and how that place has been taken away, by a broader agenda, by a Western ideology, and that my world, or the world that my grandmother lived in, has been turned upside down. And the systems that we use to make decisions, so when we talk about recommendations, we can talk about waste, and we know the problems with seepage and everything else, but what really is disempowering are our systems of decision making, and that we're using a majority rule system, we're using a first past the post electoral system, and which has been adopted into our colonized communities that were created by the Indian Act in Canada. They're very disempowering. We have to make the connection between the legislative tools and instruments that Canada uses and the lack of power and voice that we have in our communities as Indigenous people. That is how we are silenced. And the newest instrument of silence is probably Bill C-51, which will create terrorists of us who try to invoke the concepts of natural law to protect our ecosystems. So, I don't want to run out of time, but I just like to make those points up front, to say that we need to make the connection between the oppression and silencing of Indigenous peoples and the agenda of Indigenous peoples to protect ecosystems, to protect connectedness to land, to honor the traditions and the heritage of living as stewards and caretakers. We're watching that slip away from us, and what I see is that the value of Indigenous cultures, Indigenous traditions isn't realized by most Canadians. To be able to stand in a place and say, as an Indigenous woman, to say, I walked here where my great-great-grandmother put her feet, has such value. It's, you know, it's a place where you can have a story about how people interacted with ecosystems and how ecosystems reacted over time. That knowledge in perpetuity, and we hear it from, you know, time immemorial. And the problem with Elliot Lake is that you have a transient community come in and promise jobs and open up a mine and deposit, you know, waste into 10 lakes, and then build a few dams, actually 86 dams, and give or take a few, and then that transient population picked up and moved off to Saskatchewan. The people who live there for time immemorial are living there, still watching this, watching these tailings seep down the Serpent River watershed. Not given, I mean, any consideration by the environmental assessment panel. Just, you know, government officials pandering to the local indigenous population. And we did ask, you know, in the hearings as indigenous women, we asked for the technology, for the investment to build long-term monitoring facilities, to build a trust for the community, understanding that it is a legacy. So, you know, it's a question that's going to face my community for a long time, a really, really long time. I want to sort of sidetrack a little bit and talk a little bit about carbon capture, just to use it as an example. I hosted a national conference, and I wanted to make it a carbon neutral event, so I had to plant trees to offset the carbon that was captured. And I'm a very big skeptic of, you know, carbon capturing and trading. So I said, okay, well, go ahead and we'll plant these trees. So we planted 800 jack pine at Serpent River. And I realized that I had to undertake a personal responsibility to those 800 jack pine for the rest of my life. And because it's going to take those 800 jack pine, you know, 80 years to capture the carbon that was released from my conference back in 2003. And so that's only 80 years. So I took my granddaughter there and I introduced her to those jack pine. And I told my children, I said, you know, these jack pine here, that's my commitment. I took that on. I mean, we have no certainty. There could be a fire, there could be a drought, could be torrential rains. Anything could happen to those trees. You know, and that was my experiment, I guess, with carbon capture. But it was also a lesson in terms of legacy and a long-term commitment to a place, you know, and to introduce my grandchildren to that place and that responsibility. But the bigger issue is probably that waste at Elliot Lake that has to be managed in perpetuity, those dams that have to be cared for. And to do that with both hands tied behind your back, you know, as a local indigenous community that is governed by the Indian Act, where people are treated as wards of the state, you know, communities that are underfunded, communities that are not resourced, communities that are in social trauma, in dysfunction, caused by a conflict of ideologies, caused by an imposition of another value system. What are the tools that we need to respond to those challenges? If we are indigenous communities and we're going to live next to nuclear waste, or near nuclear waste, or in contaminated areas, what are the tools that we need to be successful, to survive that legacy? So, you know, what I'm proposing is that there is a responsibility to work in cooperation, to empower people, to empower people to face the challenges that they face every day. Challenges that were caused by external interests. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Elliot Lake specifically, and some of you may have heard about the collapse of the Elliot Lake Mall. Does anybody? So there's a mall that was built in the heyday of Elliot Lake. And in fact, I remember taking my kids through that mall in a shopping cart, noticing the pails of water scattered here and there to catch the rain that was leaking in. And my son's 30 years old now. And when the thing collapsed, everybody knew. There's just sort of, I don't know what it is, a whole community that stands around and realizes that the roof is leaking. And that it's a concrete structure, and the concrete became unstable and the place collapsed. And I felt kind of guilty. I thought I was the one who was in there and I saw those pails, and what did I do about it? Did I do anything? Did I phone somebody and say, hey, we should keep an eye on this, something bad is going to happen? But we didn't. We didn't do anything. And people were killed. But it speaks to this promise of wealth that the mines came in and said, we're going to create jobs, we're going to generate wealth. It's going to be it's going to be great. It's going to be so much money, and there was money. There was a lot of money in Elliot Lake. But if you go there today, there is absolutely no evidence of wealth generation. There is no evidence that $35 million was sucked out between 1955 and 1958. That's just one block of time. But for the life of the mines, I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you the wealth that was generated at those mines. I just know that, it was Frank Jubin who bragged, that for an investment of $3,500, they sucked out $35 million in a few years. So where is that wealth? Where's the recompense? Where's the reinvestment? And I think we need a forensic audit on the claims that were made by industry regarding the wealth generation that they promised. And with that, I will close because I'm running out of time. So, miigwech.